Good morning, crime community. I'm here to read out some more Edgar Allan Poe. This is called The Assignation. Stay for me there, I will not fail, to meet thee in thy hollow vale. Henry King, Bishop of Chester. Ill-fated and mysterious man, bewildered in the brilliancy of thine own imagination, and fallen in the flames of thy own youth, again in fancy I behold thee. Once more thy form hath risen before me, not as thou art in thou cold valley and shadow, but as thou shouldest be, squandering away a life of magnificent meditation in the city of dim visions, thine own Venice, which is a star-beloved asylum of the sea, and the wide windows of those Palladian palaces look down with a deep and bitter meaning upon the secrets of her silent waters. Yes, I repeat it, as thou shouldest be. There are surely other words than this, other thoughts than the thoughts of the multitude, other speculations of the speculations of the sophist. Then who shall call thy conduct into question? Who blame thy for thy visionary hours, or denounce thy occupations as a wasting away of life, which were but of the overflowing of thy everlasting energies? It was at Venice, beneath the covered archway, where they called the Ponte de Soffre, and I met for the third and fourth time the person of whom I speak. It is with a confused recollection that I bring to mind the circumstances of that meeting. Yet I remember, oh, how I could have forget the deep midnight, the bridge of sighs, the beauty of women, and the genius of romance that stalked up and down the narrow canal. It was the night of unusual gloom. The great clock of the piazza had sounded the fifth hour of the Italian evening. The square of the Campanile lay silent and deserted, and the lights of the old ducal palace were dying fast away. I was returning home from the piazza by way of the Grand Canal, but as my gondola arrived opposite the mouth of the Canal San Marco, a female voice from its recesses broke suddenly upon the night. One wild, hysterical, and long-continued shriek. Startled at the sound, I sprang upon my feet, while the gondolier, letting slip the single oar, lost it in the pitchy darkness, beyond the chance of recovery, and we were consequently led into the guidance of the current, which here sets from the greater into the smaller canal. Like some huge and sable-feathered condor, we were slowly drifting down towards the bridge of sighs, when 1,000 flambeaux flashing from the windows and down the staircases of the ducal palace turned all at once that deep gloom into the livid and prenatal day. A child slipping from the arms of her own mother had fallen from an upper window of the lofty structure into the deep and dim canal. The quiet waters had closed placidly over the victim, and although my own gondola was the only one in sight, many a stout swimmer, already on the stream, was seeking in vain upon the surface. The treasure which was to be found, alas, only within the abyss. Upon the broad black marble flagstones of the entrance of the palace, and a few steps above the water, stood a figure which none of them saw, can have ever since been forgotten. It was Marchesa Aphrodite, the adoration of all Venice, the gayest of all the gay. The most lovely were all the beautiful, but still the young wife of the old and intriguing Mentoni, and the mother of the fair child, her first and only one, who now deep beneath the murky water was thinking in bitterness of heart upon her sweet caresses, and exhausting in little life in struggles to call upon her name. She stood alone, her small bare and silvery feet gleamed in the black mirror of marble beneath her. Her hair was not yet more than half loosened, for the night from the ballroom array clustered amid the shower of diamonds round and round her classical head in curls like those of the young hyacinth. A snowy white and gauze-like drapery seemed to be nearly the sole covering her delicate form, but the midsummer midnight air was hot, sullen, and still, and no motion of the statue-like form itself stirred upon the folds of that raiment of the very vapor which hung around it, as to say, marble hangs around the Nobi. Yet, strange to say, Her large, lustrous eyes were not turned towards upon the grave wherein the brightest hope lay buried, but riveted in the widely different direction. The prison of the old romantic is, I think, the stateliest building of all Venice. But how could the lady gaze so fixedly upon it, but beneath her lay stifling her only child? Yon dark, gloomy niche, too, yawns right opposite her chamber window. What then could there be in the shadows, in its architecture, in its ivory wreath and solemn cornices, that the Marchesa de Montoni had not yet wandered into 1,000 times before? Nonsense. Who does not remember that at such a time as this, the eye of a shattered mirror multiplies the images of its sorrow and sees the innumerable far-off places, the woe which is close at hand, many steps above the Marchesa, and within the arch of the gateway stood, in full dress, the satyr-like figure of Montoni himself. He was occasionally occupied in thrumming a guitar and seemed ennuyé to the very death. At its intervals, he gave directions for the recovery of his child. Stupefied and aghast, I had myself no power to move from the upright position, as I assumed upon first hearing the shriek, and must have presented to the eyes an agitated group, a special and ominous appearance, as with pale in countenance and rigid limbs, I floated down among them in the funeral gondola. All efforts proved in vain. Many of the most energetic in the search were relaxing their exertions and yielding to the gloomy sorrow. There seemed but little hope for the child, how much less than for the mother. And now, from the interior of the dark niche, which had been already mentioned as forming a part of the old Republican prison and is fronting the lattice of the Marchesa, the figure muffled in the cloak stepped out within reach of the light, and pausing in a moment upon the verge of the giddy descent, pleading headlong into the canal, and in an instant afterward he stood in the still living and breathing child within his grasp upon the marble flagstones by the side of the Marchesa, his cloak heavy with the drenching water, stood unfastened, and falling in folds about his feet, discovered the wonder-stricken spectators as graceful persons of a very young man, with the sounds of whose name was the greater part of Europe than the ringing. No word spoken, the deliverer, but the Marchesa. She will not now receive her child. She will press it against her heart. She will cling to its little form and smother it with her caresses. Alas, another's arm have taken it from the stranger. Another's arms have taken it away and borne it afar off, unnoticed, into the palace. And the Marchesa, her beautiful lips trembles. Tears are gathering in her eyes, whose eyes, which, like Pliny's acanthus, are soft and almost liquid. Yes, tears are gathering in those eyes. And see, the entire woman thrills throughout the soul, and the stature had started into life. The pallor of the marble countenance and the swelling of the marble bosom, the very purity of the marble feet, we behold suddenly flushed over the tide of ungovernable crimson, and a slender shudder quivers about her delicate frame, as a gentle air of Napoli about the rich silver lilies in the grass. Why should the lady blush? To this demand there is no answer, except that, having left in the eager haste and terror of the mother's heart the privacy of her own boudoir, she has neglected the ethereal, her tiny feet in her slippers, and utterly forgotten to throw over her Venetian shoulders the drapery which is their due. What other possible reason could there have been for such her blushing? For the glance of those wild, appealing eyes, for the unusual tumult of the throbbing bosom, for the convulsive pressure of the trembling hand? The hand which fell as Montoni turned into the palace accidentally upon the hand of the stranger. What reason could there have been for the singularly low tone of the unmeaning words which the lady uttered hurriedly as bidding them adieu? Thou hast conquered, she said, or the murmurs of the water deceived me. Thou hast conquered 1 hour after sunrise. We shall meet, so let it be. The tumult was subsided. The lights had died away within the palace, and the stranger, who I now recognized, stood alone above the flags. He shook the inconceivable agitation, and his eyes glanced around in search of the gondola. I could not do less than offer him the services of my own, and he accepted the civility. Having obtained an oar of the Watergate and proceeded together in his residence, while they rapidly recovered his self-possession and spoke of the former slight acquaintance in terms of the great apparent cordiality, there are some subjects upon which I can take pleasure in being minute. The person of the stranger, let him call me by his title, who to all the world he's still a stranger. The person of the stranger is one of these subjects. The height he must have been below rather than above the medium size, although there were moments of intense passion when his frame actually expanded and bellied the assertion. The light, almost slender symmetry of his figure promised more of the ready activity which he evinced in the bridge of size than the Herculean strength which he had been known to wield without an effort upon occasions of more dangerous emergency, with the mouth and the chin of the deity, singular, wild, full, liquid eyes, whose shadows varied from pure hazel to intense and brilliant jet, and the profusion of curling black hair from which a forehead of unusual breadth gleamed forth at intervals, all light and ivory. His were features than which I have seen more classically regular, except perhaps the marble ones of the Emperor Commodus, yet his countenance was nevertheless one of which all men have seen the same period of their lives and have never afterward seen again. It had no peculiar, it had no settled, predominant expression to be fastened upon the memory, a countenance seen and instantly forgotten, but forgotten with a vague and never ceasing desire of recalling it to mind. Then that spirit of each rapid passing failed at any time to throw its own distant image into the mirror of that face, and that the mirror, mirror-like, retained no vestige of the passion when the passage had departed. Upon leaving him at the night of our adventure, he solicited me in what I thought an urgent matter to call upon him very early the next morning. Shortly after sunrise, I found myself accordingly at his palazzo, in one of those huge structures of gloomy yet fantastic pomp which tower above the waters of the Grand Canal. Into the vicinity of the Rialto, I was shown up to a broad winding staircase of mosaics into the apartment, which in unparalleled splendor burst through the opening door into an actual glare, make me blind and dizzy with luxuriousness. I knew my acquaintance to be wealthy, reported to be spoken of his possessions in terms which I had ventured to call him the ridiculous exaggeration, but he had gazed upon me, and I could not bring myself to believe that the wealth of any subject in Europe could have supplied the princely magnificence which burned and blazed around. Although, as I say, the sun had risen, yet the room was still brilliantly lighted up. I judged from the circumstance, as well as from the air of the exhaustion of the countenance of my friend, that I had not retired to bed during the whole of the preceding night. In the architecture and the embellishments of the chamber, the evident design had been to dazzle and astound. Little attention had been paid to the decora of what is technically called keeping or to proprieties of nationality. The eye have wandered upon object to object and rested upon neither the grotesques of the Greek painters or the sculptures of the best Italian days, nor the huge carvings of the untutored Egypt. Rich draperies in every part of the room trembled to the vibration of low, melancholy music whose origin was not to be discovered. The senses were oppressed by mingled and conflicting perfumes, reeking up from strange convolute censers, together with multitudinous flaring and flickering tongues of emerald and violet fire. The rays of the newly risen sun poured upon the whole through glasses formed, each of a single pane of crimson-tinted glass, glancing to and fro in 1,000 reflections. From curtains which rolled from the cornices of cataracts of molten silver, the beams of natural glory mingled at length fitfully with the artful light, and lay weltering in subdued masses upon the carpet of rich, liquid-looking cloth of chilly gold. Ha, 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 laughed the proprietor, motioning me to a seat as I entered the room, and throwing myself back as I full length upon an ottoman. I see, and he, perceiving that I could not immediately reconcile myself to the benseance of so singular a welcome, I see you as astonished at my apartment, at my statues, my pictures, my originality of conception, my architecture, my upholstery, absolutely drunk, eh, with my magnificence? But pardon me, my dear sir, there his tone, his voice dropped to the very spirit of cordiality. Pardon me for my uncharitable laughter. You appeared so utterly astonished. Besides, some things are so completely ludicrous that a man must laugh or die. To die laughing must be the most glorious of all glorious deaths. Sir Thomas More, a very fine man, was Sir Thomas More. Sir Thomas More died laughing, you remember? Also, the absurdities of Ravus Textor, who was a long list of characters who came to the magnificent end. Do you know, however, continued his musingly, that is Sparta, which is now Polieri at Sparta? I say, to the west of the citadel, among the chaos of scarcely visible ruins, is a kind of sosal upon which are still legible the letters, and they are undoubtedly part of it. And now at Sparta, where 1,000 temples and shrines to 1,000 different divinities, how exceedingly strange the altar of laughter should have survived all the others. But in the present instance, he resumed with a singular alteration of voice and manner, I have no right to be merry at your expense. You might as well have been amazed. Europe cannot produce anything so fine as this, my little regal cabinet. My other apartments are by no means of the same order, mere ultras of the fashionable insipidity. There is better than fashion, is it not? Yet this is but to be seen to become the rage, that is, with those who could afford it at the cost of their entire patrimony. I have guarded, however, against any such profanation. With one exception, you are the only human being besides myself into my valet, which has been admitted within the mysteries of these empirical precincts, which have been bedizened, as you see. I bowed in acknowledgement for the overpowering sense of splendor and perfume and music, together with the unexpected eccentricity of address and manner, preventing me from expressing in words my appreciation of what I might have construed into a compliment. Here he resumed, arising and leaving on my arm as he sauntered about the apartment. Here are paintings from the Greek of Cynebue, and from Cynebue to the present hour. Many are chosen, as you see, with little deference to the opinions of virtue. They are all, however, fitting tapestry of the chamber such as this. Here, too, are some chiefs wares of the unknown great, and here unfinished designs by men celebrated by their day, whose very names of the perspicacity of the academies have left to silence and to me. What think you, as he turned abruptly as he spoke, what think of you, this Madonna della Pieta? Is his own Guido's own? I said with all enthusiasm of my nature, for I have been poring intently over its surpassing loveliness. It is Guido's own. He could have not obtained it. She is undoubtedly in painting that the Venus is in sculpture. Ha, he said thoughtfully, the Venice, the beautiful Venice, the Venice of Medici. She is the diminutive head of the gilded hair, part of her left arm. Here her voice drops so as to be heard with difficulty. In all the right are restorations, and in the coetry of the right arm lies, I think, the quintessence of the affection. Give me the Canova, the Apollo too, as a copy. There can be no doubt of it, blind fool, that I am not, cannot behold the boast inspiration of the Apollo. I cannot help, pity me, I cannot help preferring the Antinous. It was no Socrates who said that the statuary found his statue in the block of marble, and Michelangelo was by no means original in his couplet. It has been, or should be remarked, that in the matter of the true gentleman, we are always aware of the difference from the bearing of the vulgar, without being at once precisely able to determine at what such difference consists, allowing the remark to have applied in its full recourse to the outward demeanor of my acquaintance. I felt it in the eventful morning, still more powerful, fully applicable of its moral temperament and character. nor can I better define the peculiarity of spirit which seemed to place him so essentially apart from all other human beings than by calling it a habit of intense and continual thought, pervading even his most trivial actions, intruding upon his moments of dalliance, and interweaving itself with the very flashes of merriment, like adders which writhe from the eyes of the grimming mask in the cornices around the temples of Persepolis. I could not help, however, repeatedly observing through the mingled tone of levity and solemnity with which he rapidly decanted upon matters of little importance the certain air of trepidation, a degree of nervousness, unaction in action and in speech, an unquiet expectability of manner which appeared to me at all times unaccountable, and upon some exaggerations even filled me with alarm. Frequently, too, pausing in the middle of a sentence, which commencement had apparently forgotten, to seem to be listening to the deepest attention, is if either in momentary expectation or in the visitor of the sounds which must have had existence in his imagination alone. It was during one of these reveries of pauses of apparent abstraction that, in turning over the passage of the poet and scholared politician's beautiful tragedy, the Orfeo, the first native Italian tragedy, which lay near me upon an ottoman, I discovered a passage underlined in pencil. It was a passage toward the end of the third act, a passage of the most heart-stirring excitement, a passage which, although tainted with impurity, no man shall read without a thrill of novel emotion, no woman without a sigh. The whole passage is blotted with fresh tears, and upon the opposite interleaf, with the following English lines written in a hand so very different from the peculiar characters of my acquaintance, and I had some difficulty in recognizing it as his own. Thou wast that all of me, love, for which my soul did pine, a green isle in the sea, love, a fountain and a shrine, all wreathed with fairy fruits and flowers, and all the flowers were mine. Ah, dream too bright to last, ah, starry hope that did arise, but to be overcast, a voice from out the future cries, on and on, but o'er the past, dim gulf my spirit hovering lies, mute, motionless, aghast. For alas, alas, with me the light of life is o'er. No more, no more, no more. Such language holds the solemn sea to the sands above the shore. Shall bloom the thunder-blasted tree, or the stricken eagle soar. Now all my days are trances, and all my nights dreams, and they are all gray-eye glances, and they are footstep gleams. But what eternal, but what ethereal dances, but what Italian streams? Alas, for the accursed time that bore thee over the billow, from love to titled age and crimson and an holy pillow, for me and from my misty clime, where weeps the silver willow. What these lines were written in English, a language with which I had no belief their author acquainted, afforded me little matter for surprise. I was well aware of the extent of their requirements and of the singular pleasure he took in concealing them from observation, to be astonished by any similar discovery, but the place of date, I must confess, occasioned me no little amazement. I had been originally written London, and afterwards carefully overscored, not however so effectually as to conceal the word from a scrutinizing eye. I say this occasioned me no little amazement, for I will remember that in a former conversation with my friend, I peculiarly inquired as he had at any time met in London the Marchesa de Montoni, for some years previous to her marriage and resided in that city, when his answer, if I mistake not, gave me to understand that he had never visited the metropolis of Great Britain. I might as well here mention that I have more than once heard without of giving credit to the reporting involving so many improbabilities, and the person of whom I speak was not only my birth, but in education an Englishman. There is one painting, he said, without being aware of my notice of the tragedy. There is still one painting which you have not seen, and throwing aside a drapery, he discovered a full-length portrait of the Marchesa Aphrodite. Human art could have done no more to the delineation of her superhuman beauty. The same ethereal figure which stood before me the preceding night upon the steps of the ducal palace stood before me once again. In the expression of the countenance, which was beaming all over with smiles, there still lurked the incomprehensible anomaly and fitful stain of melancholy, which will forever be found inseparable from the perfection of the beautiful. Her right arm lay folded over her bosom. With her left, she pointed downward to the curiosity-fashioned vase. One small fairly foot, alone visible, barely touched the earth, and scarcely discernible in the brilliant atmosphere, which seemed to encircle the enshrine her loveliness, floated a pair of the most delicately imagined wings. My glance fell from the painting to the figure of my friend, and the vigorous words of Chapman's Bussy d'Amboise quivered instinctively upon my lips. He is up there like a Roman statue. He will stand till death hath made him marble. Come, he said at length, turning toward the marble, the table of richly enameled and massive silver, upon which were a few goblets fantastically stained, together with two large Etruscan vases fashioned in the same extraordinary model as that in the foreground of the portrait, and filled with what I suppose to be Johannisberger. Come, he said abruptly, let us drink. It is early, let us drink. It is indeed early, he continued musingly, as a cherub with a heavy golden hammer made the apartment ring with the first hour of sunrise. After it is indeed early, but what matters? Let us drink. Let us pour out an offering to ye solemn sun, which these gaudy lamps and censers are so eager to subdue. And having made my pledge him in a bumper, he swallowed in rapid succession several goblets of the wine. To dream, he continued, resuming the tone of the desultory conversation as he held up to the rich light of the censer one of the magnificent vases. To dream has been the business of my life. I have therefore framed for myself, as you see, a bower of dreams. In the heart of Venice, could I have erected a better? I behold around you, is it true, a medley of architectural embellishments? The chastity of Iona is offended by the antediluvian devices, and the sphinxes of Egypt are outstretched upon carpets of gold, and the effect of incongruous to the timid alone. Properties of place, and especially of time, are the bugbears which terrify mankind from the contemplation of the magnificent. Once I was myself a decorist, but the sublimation of folly have pallid upon my soul. All of this now the fitter for my purpose, like these arabesques, centers. My spirit is writhing in fire, and the delirium of this scene is fashioning me for the wilder visions of the land of real dreams, whither I am now rapidly departing. Here he paused abruptly, bent his head to his bosom, and seemed to listen to a sound which I could not hear. At length, erecting his frame, he looked upward and ejaculated the lines of the Bishop of Chester. Stay for me there, I will not fail to meet thee in thy hollow vale. In the next instant, confessing the power of the wine, he threw himself at full length on an ottoman. A quick step was now heard upon the staircase, and a loud knock at the door rapidly succeeded. I was hastening to anticipate a second disturbance when a page of Montoni's household burst into the room and faltered out into a voice choking with emotion, and in incoherent word, my mistress, poison, poison, oh beautiful Aphrodite. Bewildered, I flew into the ottoman, endeavored to arouse the sleeper to a sense of startling intelligence. But his limbs were rigid, his lips were livid, his lately beaming eyes were riveted in death. I staggered back to the table, my hand fell upon a cracked and blackened goblet, and a conscience of entire and terrible truth flashed suddenly over my soul. That is the end of the Assignation. That was a long read for me today. We hope we like and share, subscribe, and have a nice day.